How Chuck Yeager carried a wounded bombardier across the Pyrenees. Late March 1944. The Pyrenees Mountains, somewhere on the French-Spanish border. Altitude approximately 9,000 feet. Flight Officer Chuck Yeager, 21 years old, from Hamlin, West Virginia, was carrying a man on his back through waist-deep snow. The man's name was Omar Pat Patterson Jr., First Lieutenant, B-24 Navigator, 24 years old, from Sacramento, California. He weighed about 220 pounds. He was missing his right leg below the knee. Yeager had cut it off 2 hours ago with a pocket knife in a freezing creek at the bottom of a mountain flume, while German soldiers fired from the ridge above. Now he was carrying Patterson through the Pyrenees, through snow so deep it swallowed him to the waist, through wind that cut through every layer of clothing, through air so thin that each breath felt like sucking through a straw, through mountain terrain that would challenge a healthy man with full equipment. Yeager had no equipment, no food, no map, a pistol with a few rounds left, a pocket knife with blood on the blade, and a man on his back who was unconscious and bleeding through a makeshift tourniquet. One more step, then one more, then one more. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe. We tell the World War II stories about courage, survival, and the men who refused to leave anyone behind. To understand how Yeager ended up on that mountain with a dying man and a pocket knife, you need to go back 3 weeks. March 5th, 1944. Yeager's P-51B Mustang was shot down over Bordeaux by 3 FW-190s. 20-millimeter cannon fire cut his elevator cables. He bailed out at 18,000 feet, pulled the ripcord at 8,000, and landed in occupied France by grabbing the top of a sapling and riding it to the ground. Wounded in the right hand and forehead. Alone. Behind enemy lines. He survived because of 2 things: the skills he'd learned growing up in the Appalachian Hills of West Virginia, and the French resistance. The Maquis hid him, moved him from safe house to safe house, village to village, for weeks. The penalty for harboring an Allied pilot was death. The French civilians who sheltered him knew this. They did it anyway. Eventually, Yeager reached a staging area near the town of Nerac in southwestern France. The regional Maquis chief, a man known as Gabriel, organized escape routes for downed airmen. The plan was to cross the Pyrenees into Spain on foot, neutral territory. From there, the American embassy in Madrid. From there, England. Yeager wasn't the only evader waiting for the crossing. There were 3 other Americans. Among them was Patterson. Patterson had been shot down weeks before Yeager. His B-24 had taken a direct hit from flak over Toulouse. He'd bailed out, been found by the resistance, and been moved south toward the mountains. He was healthy when Yeager first met him, both legs intact, ready to walk. A Basque guide was assigned to lead them. Small man, 50 years old, face hardened by decades of mountain weather. He'd been smuggling people across the Pyrenees since the Spanish Civil War. He knew every trail, every pass, every place where the snow was thin enough to walk and where it would swallow you. The crossing began in late March. The timing was dictated by weather, by German patrol schedules, by the phase of the moon. They moved at night when they could, during the day when they had to. The first day was manageable. Low hills, forest trails, cold but not brutal. They walked in single file, the guide in front, Yeager behind him, Patterson behind Yeager. The other 2 Americans bringing up the rear. They covered maybe 8 miles, slept in a mountain shelter, ate whatever the guide had brought. Bread, dried meat, not much, enough. The second day, the terrain changed. The trails steepened, the forest thinned, snow appeared. First in patches between the trees, then in sheets covering the ground, then in drifts that came up to Yeager's thighs and didn't stop. The temperature dropped, the wind picked up, the air thinned as they climbed. Above the tree line, there was nothing between them and the weather, just rock and snow and sky. Patterson kept up. He was strong. A big man, but the altitude was getting to him. Breathing hard, sweating despite the cold, stumbling. They found a mountain hut, an abandoned shepherd's shelter, stone walls, a roof. No heat, but shelter from the wind. They stopped to rest. The guide said they would stay for a few hours, eat, sleep if they could, continue at dusk. Patterson hung his socks outside to dry. A small thing, an innocent thing, the kind of thing a man does without thinking because wet socks in the mountains are a pathway to frostbite and trench foot. A German patrol spotted the socks. The first bullets tore through the walls of the hut, wood and stone fragments flying, the sound of rifle fire echoing off the mountains. Yeager grabbed Patterson. They scrambled for the back window. Out! Into the snow! Running! Not running! Floundering! Falling through snow, getting up, falling again. The German fire following them. There was a log flume nearby, a long wooden channel built into the mountainside for sending timber down to the valleys below. Steep, icy. A chute that dropped several hundred feet to a creek at the bottom. Yeager shoved Patterson into the flume. Patterson slid. Yeager followed. The wooden channel was slick with ice. They picked up speed immediately, sliding, bouncing off the sides. No control. They hit the creek at the bottom. Freezing water, ice cold. Mountain runoff from the snowfields above. Yeager surfaced. His lungs seized. The cold was like being hit with a hammer. Every muscle contracted. Every nerve screamed. He found Patterson, grabbed him, pulled him to the bank. Patterson was hit. A bullet had struck his right knee during the scramble from the hut. He was gray, his face the color of the snow around them, conscious, barely. Yeager looked at the wound. It was bad. The bullet had shattered the knee. Everything below the joint was destroyed. Bone fragments, torn muscle. The lower leg was connected to the upper leg by a single tendon. Nothing else. Just one strand of tissue holding the limb on. There was nothing to do but finish what the bullet had started. Yeager had a pocket knife. A folding knife with a 3-inch blade, the kind of tool he'd carried in the woods of West Virginia since he was old enough to walk. He'd used it to gut deer, clean fish, whittle sticks, carve toys, 100 small tasks that mountain life required. He'd never used it for this. He cut the tendon, one motion, clean. The lower leg came free. He threw it aside. Tourniquet, strips of clothing, his own shirt torn into bands, wrapped tight above the knee, pulled as hard as he could, then tied off, then wrapped again. The bleeding slowed, not stopped, slowed. Bandage, more strips, over the stump, tight, pressure, hold it until the bleeding was manageable. Patterson was unconscious by this point. The shock and the pain had taken him somewhere else. His body was present. His mind was gone. He was breathing, shallow, fast, but breathing. Yeager looked up the mountain. The German patrol was somewhere above, searching. They'd heard the shots. They'd seen the men run. They knew someone was down here. He looked at Patterson. 220 pounds of unconscious man with one leg. In a freezing creek bed, in the Pyrenees, in winter, with Germans above. Standard survival training said leave him, save yourself. One man moving fast has a chance. Two men, one of them unconscious and missing a leg, have no chance. Yeager didn't consider leaving. The thought didn't enter his mind. It wasn't a decision he made. It was a decision that had been made for him 21 years earlier in a house in Hamlin, West Virginia, by parents who taught their children that you don't leave people behind. You don't leave the deer on the mountain. You don't leave the firewood in the rain. You don't leave the man in the creek. He picked Patterson up, got him onto his back, arms over his shoulders, the weight hitting him like a sack of concrete. 220 pounds, plus the wet clothing, plus the dead weight of an unconscious body that couldn't hold on, couldn't balance, couldn't help, and he walked. Through the creek bed, through the snow on the far bank, into the forest, away from the Germans, south, towards Spain. Every step an act of will against physics. Against exhaustion. Against the screaming in his legs and his back and his lungs. The Basque guide found them. Appeared out of the trees like a ghost. He'd escaped the hut through a different route. He looked at Yeager carrying Patterson. Looked at the bloody tourniquet. Looked at the stump. Didn't say anything. Just turned and started walking, leading them south. For another day, Yeager carried Patterson through the Pyrenees. His own wound, the shrapnel cuts on his hand from the shoot-down 3 weeks earlier, had reopened from the strain. He could feel blood pooling inside his glove. His legs were beyond tired. They'd passed through burning and cramping and numbness and had arrived at a place where they simply moved because he told them to move, and stopping was not among the options. Patterson drifted in and out, unconscious, semi-conscious, mumbling, fragments of sentences, names Yeager didn't recognize, a girl named Dorothy, a street in Sacramento, his mother's phone number repeated over and over. Yeager talked to him. Not comforting words, practical words. The words of a man from Hamlin who didn't believe in soft talk when hard walking was needed. One more step, Pat. Just this one. Don't think about the next. Right foot, left. That's all there is. He thought about deer, about carrying carcasses down mountain trails in West Virginia when he was 12 years old. A buck could weigh 200 pounds. He'd put it on his shoulders and walked 3 miles in the dark, uphill, his father waiting at the house. No complaints, no excuses. You carried what needed carrying. Patterson was heavier than any deer, but the principle was the same. You don't leave it on the mountain. You pick it up and you walk. On March 30th, 1944, 25 days after being shot down over Bordeaux, they crossed into Spain. The snow thinned, the air warmed, trees appeared, green trees, living trees. The Basque guide pointed south and said one word, Spain. Yeager set Patterson down, carefully, on dry ground, in sunlight. The first warmth either of them had felt in days. Patterson opened his eyes, clear, present. The fever was down. The shock was fading. He looked at Yeager. You carried me over a mountain. Yeager shrugged. Wasn't that bad. Patterson stared at him. You amputated my leg with a pocket knife in a freezing creek while Germans shot at us. Then you carried me through the Pyrenees for a day. Yeager looked at the Spanish hills, olive trees, a dirt road heading south. Civilization. I've carried heavier. He hadn't. But talking about it wasn't going to make Patterson's leg grow back or undo the last 48 hours. It was done. They were alive. That was enough. Spanish farmers found them. A doctor came, examined Patterson's leg. The amputation site was crude, but the tourniquet had held. The wound hadn't become fatally infected. Yeager's pocket knife surgery in a freezing creek, performed on instinct and adrenaline, had saved the man's life. Patterson was loaded onto a mule cart. Yeager went with him. They rode through Spanish farmland toward a hospital. Patterson looked at Yeager. You carried me over a mountain. Yeager shrugged. Wasn't that bad. You amputated my leg with a pocket knife in a freezing creek while Germans shot at us. Yeager looked at the Spanish hills. I've carried heavier. He hadn't. But talking about it wasn't going to make Patterson's leg grow back. It was done. They were alive. That was enough. Patterson survived, lost the leg permanently, but he lived. He went home to Sacramento, had a life, because a 21-year-old with a pocket knife and the stubbornness of the Appalachian Mountains had refused to put him down. Yeager was awarded the Bronze Star with a V for valor, the only Army Air Corps pilot to receive that decoration during an escape and evasion. Years later, a reporter asked about the crossing. "Where I come from, you don't leave a man on a mountain. You just don't. It's not something you think about. You just pick him up and walk." He paused, the smallest smile. "Besides, I'd carried heavier deer up steeper hills back in West Virginia. What would you have done in that creek? With a pocket knife and a man with a shattered leg and Germans above? Would you have cut? Would you have carried? Or would you have left him? Let us know in the comments." And if you want more stories about courage, survival, and the men who refuse to leave anyone behind, make sure to subscribe.